Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a date that, well, a lot of people are calling a major shift in digital finance, August 1st, 2025.
That's right. That's the day Hong Kong's big new stablecoin regulatory framework officially kicked in. And, it's much more than just a local rule change.
Absolutely. We're talking about something that could genuinely redraw the map for the whole global crypto market. So our mission here today is pretty straightforward. Just give you the shortcut to understanding this really transformative moment. We're going to try and untangle why they did this now, look at the immediate market ripples, the bigger strategic picture, and importantly, where the opportunities might lie for investors.
And it's a huge space we're talking about. I mean, the global stablecoin market, it's hit something like $271.1 billion, just massive. So Hong Kong's move, it isn't just tinkering around the edges, it's a very calculated strategy designed to reshape things significantly. We're expecting, consolidation in the market, definitely more institutional players coming in, and for those who can meet the standards, some real investment potential.
Right. It feels like a signal that, at least in Hong Kong, the sort of Wild West era for stablecoins might be drawing to a close.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so given that scale, $271 billion, you have to ask, what exactly pushed Hong Kong to make such a decisive move? And why now? What was the spark?
Well, the really big catalyst, the one you can't ignore, was the catastrophic collapse of Terra USD back in May 2022. That event just painfully highlighted all the vulnerabilities, wiped out, $42 billion in investor value? Just staggering.
Oof. Yeah, I think a lot of people still feel the sting from that one. So those lessons from Terra, how did they specifically, feed into the rules Hong Kong actually put in place? What flaws were they trying to fix?
Yeah, well, the Terra situation laid bare several critical weaknesses, and you can see them directly addressed in Hong Kong's framework. First, this idea of algorithmic stability. It just didn't hold up against the need for real, verifiable asset backing. UST's model failed spectacularly.
The code wasn't enough.
Not even close. Then second, you had those awful death spiral dynamics. Confidence drops, they mint more tokens trying to fix it, which just destroys more value. A vicious cycle.
And it spread, didn't it? It wasn't just contained to Terra.
Exactly. That's the third point, the interconnected risk. UST's failure even briefly knocked Tether, a giant, off its peg down to gladder 97 cents, showed how linked everything is. And crucially, there was a massive lack of transparency, especially with stablecoins not backed by traditional fiat currency.
So the regulators saw this and reacted directly.
Pretty much. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the HKMA, their own research after the fact basically said, look, stablecoins backed by a greater amount of reserve assets suffered from a smaller decline. Simple as that. That finding directly led to their 100% reserve backing rule. And you had global bodies like the Financial Stability Board also warning about the fragility of stablecoins that weren't properly designed or regulated. It all pushed in the same direction.
Okay, so it's definitely a reaction to that crisis. But is it just about preventing another Terra? Or is there a bigger, more ambitious game plan here? Are they just stabilizing or are they aiming to lead?
Oh, it's definitely about leadership. I mean, yes, stability is key, but Hong Kong seems to have three really clear strategic goals here. One, yes, financial stability, reduce those systemic risks. Two, investor protection, build confidence through tough licensing and transparency. Makes sense. But the third one, and this feels like the big play, is market competitiveness. Positioning Hong Kong as the go-to regulated digital asset hub in Asia. They're thinking long-term.
Right, and this is where I think it gets really interesting, especially when you consider the wider context. Something maybe not always picked up in Western commentary. Is there maybe a deeper, quieter driver related to, say, mainland China?
You're hitting on a really critical and maybe underappreciated angle. Hong Kong's unique position makes it a potential testing ground for China's digital yuan, the ECNY, and its international rollout. This new stablecoin framework, it creates the rails, the infrastructure needed for a kind of regulatory sandbox. Mainland companies could use it to experiment with blockchain settlements in a compliant way. It also, importantly, opens the door for possible RMB-referenced stablecoins down the line, under supervision, of course.
Potentially supports bigger initiatives.
Exactly. Think about building cross-border payment systems that support China's Belt and Road Initiative, but using compliant digital channels. It's a very strategic piece of financial infrastructure with, frankly, geopolitical implications.
Okay, so the framework's been live since August 1st. It's still early days. But what are we seeing on the ground? What are the sources telling us about the immediate effects of this rollout?
Well, the initial signs point towards a very restrictive approach. Quality over quantity seems to be the mantra. On the licensing front, the word is that only a handful of licenses will likely be granted at first. Applications aren't even due until September 30th, 2025.
A handful, so high barriers.
Extremely high. We're talking HK $25 million minimum capital, strict localization requirements. The compliance standards are being described as extremely challenging. Put it this way. Even huge existing players, like Tether, might find it tough to meet all these requirements right out of the gate.
Wow, that sounds like it could really shake things up. How's the market actually reacting to this tight leash?
Well, we've already seen some pretty sharp market moves connected to stablecoin speculation, enough that the HKMA and the Securities and Futures Commission, the SFC, put out joint warnings telling people not to make irrational investment decisions.
Yeah.
Plus, you see companies making announcements about planning to apply for licenses, and that alone causes volatility. The authorities are basically saying, hold your horses, an application doesn't mean approval.
Tread carefully. Got it. Now, this inevitably brings up the comparison with Singapore, right? Singapore's often seen as being ahead in the crypto game in Asia. How does Hong Kong's approach stack up against theirs?
Yeah, that's the big regional comparison everyone's watching. And it's true, Singapore got out the gate faster with licensing. I think the numbers were something like 13 major payment institution licenses issued by Singapore in 2024, compared to Hong Kong having 7 fully licensed crypto exchanges at that point.
So Singapore had the early lead in volume. What were their advantages?
They had regulatory clarity earlier with their Payment Services Act. They were seen as proactive on risk management, politically stable, and generally had more streamlined processes for getting licensed.
Okay, so Singapore's faster, maybe broader. Is Hong Kong just playing catch up then, or is it a different strategy altogether?
I think it's definitely a different strategy. Hong Kong might be behind on the number of licenses, but they're making some distinct moves. Their retail framework seems more progressive, actually allowing regulated participation by ordinary investors, which Singapore has been a bit more wary of. Plus, approving those spot Bitcoin and Ether ETFs back in April 2024, that was a big signal to institutional money. And don't forget, Hong Kong's ace. No capital gains tax. That's always attractive.
Interesting. So maybe different angles.
And there's another twist. Some sources are suggesting that as Singapore cracks down harder on unlicensed exchanges, some of that activity, that liquidity, might actually flow towards Hong Kong's regulated environment, especially for retail. So it's a dynamic situation, still unfolding.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? And this is maybe a good point to pause and ask you, our listener, what really stands out to you here? You've got Hong Kong's quality over quantity approach, high barriers, maybe higher trust, versus Singapore's, let's say, faster licensing speed. Do you think Hong Kong's more restrictive, perhaps more meticulously planned environment is better for long-term innovation and stability? Or does it risk kind of strangling growth before it starts? Something to chew on. Okay, so we've looked at the immediate reaction, the sort of competitive chess game with Singapore. But let's go deeper. These rules aren't just surface level. They seem to be fundamentally changing how stablecoin businesses have to operate.
Oh, absolutely. It's forcing a kind of evolution, you could say. The operational demands are intense. We're talking full 100% reserve backing, reported daily with independent audits, segregated trust accounts so user funds are safe if the issuer goes bust, much stricter KYC, know your customer, and anti-money laundering rules.
And the cost of all that compliance.
Exactly. It's significant. And that naturally favors the bigger, well-funded players. It creates this sort of economic moat, making it harder for smaller startups. So, yeah, market consolidation seems almost inevitable.
So survival of the fittest, or maybe the richest in this case. But do these challenges also create new openings, new kinds of businesses?
Definitely. You see a growing need for specialized services. The trust industry, for example, providing professional custody for those reserves. That's huge. And also companies providing the tech infrastructure needed to run these compliant stablecoin operations, reporting tools, monitoring systems, etc. It's building out a whole support ecosystem.
Right, an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And speaking of ecosystems, it's impossible to ignore Ethereum's role in all this. The numbers suggest it's not just a platform for stablecoins, it's kind of the platform.
It really is dominant. Ethereum hosts something like 50% of the entire global stablecoin market. That's about $122.5 billion out of that $271 billion total we mentioned earlier. You look at the big ones, Tether, USDT, has around $61 billion just on Ethereum, Circle's USDC, about $37 billion, which is over 60% of its total supply, all on Ethereum.
Big activity.
Massive. Monthly transaction volume on Ethereum driven by stablecoins is around $850 billion. It's just staggering. Ethereum is the main highway for stablecoins right now.
That scale really underlines that investment idea we've talked about before, the stablecoin Ethereum growth flywheel. Can you just quickly recap how that's supposed to work?
Sure, it's this idea of a self-reinforcing cycle. So more stablecoin activity on Ethereum means more transactions, which means more gas fees being paid. Higher network use can push up the price of ETH, Ethereum's native token. That encourages more people to stake their ETH to help secure the network.
And staking takes ETH off the market.
Right, reducing circulating supply, which can potentially boost the price further. Then the increased staking makes the network more secure, which attracts more developers and big projects. And that bigger, more secure ecosystem naturally attracts more stablecoin demand. The wheel keeps turning.
It's a compelling loop. And are we seeing institutions buying into this, literally, putting ETH on their balance sheets?
Yes, increasingly so. The data shows listed companies are adding ETH to their reserves. I think the top 50 institutions now hold something like 1.34 million ETH combined. It signals growing institutional confidence not just in ETH as an asset, but in its foundational role, especially tied to this booming stablecoin economy. They see the plumbing and want a piece of it.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the investment angle directly. Given this new Hong Kong framework and Ethereum's role, what are the immediate opportunities people should be looking for? And what about the bigger, longer-term shifts?
Right. Immediately, well, any company that actually manages to secure one of those Hong Kong stablecoin licenses, they're likely going to be highly valued simply because licenses will be scarce. Having access to the retail market, which is exclusive to licensed players, that's a huge competitive advantage, a moat.
So the license itself is valuable.
Hugely. Then expect faster institutional adoption generally now that there's a clear compliant pathway in a major financial center. And as we said, increased demand for those specialized services, trust, custody, compliance, tech providers, those are definite growth areas. And maybe look out for new cross-border payment companies using this framework as a launchpad for expanding in Asia.
Okay, that's the near term. And looking further out, say 5-10 years, how might this reshape the global picture?
Longer term, Hong Kong's detailed framework could actually become a model. Maybe not copied exactly, but influencing regulations in mainland China, potentially other countries too. It could help set international standards. This growing institutional legitimacy, driven by regulation, is likely to lead to much broader mainstream adoption of compliant stablecoins. That means vastly increased transaction volumes flowing through these licensed issuers and the networks like Ethereum that support them.
Makes sense. But of course, it can't all be smooth sailing. Every big change has risks. What are the potential bumps in the road or complexities that the sources are flagging?
Yeah, there are definitely risks. One big one is policy divergence. What if Hong Kong's rules end up quite different from mainland China's in practice? That could limit how scalable things really are. Or the competition between Hong Kong and Singapore, if they take very different paths, it could fragment the Asian market.
And outside Asia?
Right. Then you have potential fragmentation from what happens in the US, for example. If the US passes something like the Genius Act, and it conflicts with Hong Kong or EU rules, you end up with a messy global patchwork of regulations. That makes life difficult for everyone.
And within the Hong Kong market itself, beyond the regulators?
Well, the fact that so few licenses might be granted could create artificial scarcity, maybe even speculative bubbles around those licensed entities. The high cost of compliance, as we mentioned, could genuinely stifle innovation from smaller, potentially more nimble players. They just can't afford to play. And for any company operating globally, navigating these different, sometimes conflicting rules across borders is just a major operational headache and cost.
So, bringing it all together then, if you had to boil down the absolute key message from Hong Kong's big move on stablecoins, what would it be?
I think the main takeaway is that Hong Kong isn't just slapping some rules on crypto. It's strategically curating a specific vision for digital finance. This framework is, yes, a direct response to the terror disaster and those systemic failures, but it's also a very deliberate play for leadership in digital finance. The approach, restrictive on entry, but enabling once you're in, creates what you could call a regulatory moat. It fundamentally favors established, well-resourced players focused on compliance. It's changing the definition of success in the stablecoin world.
It's about legitimacy, backed by the state. And for you listening right now, maybe an investor, maybe just someone interested in this space, how should you filter this for your own thinking or strategy?
Well, for investors, I think the picture is becoming clearer. You've got this confluence of factors. Stablecoin adoption is still growing. Ethereum is the dominant technical platform. And now you have this regulatory clarity emerging in a key Asian hub. It builds a pretty compelling investment case. Success likely means identifying the companies that can actually navigate and benefit from this regulatory moat, the ones who get the licenses, the key service providers, and probably maintaining some strategic exposure to the underlying ecosystem, particularly Ethereum, given how central it is to the whole thing. It's about being discerning, not just jumping on hype.
Right. And with those first licenses expected sometime in early 2026, these next few months feel pretty critical for companies trying to position themselves. It leaves us with a final thought for you. As these kinds of regulations start to take hold, not just in Hong Kong, but potentially globally, what new opportunities or perhaps challenges do you see emerging? How might this change your own relationship with digital assets over the next few years? We'd genuinely love to hear your perspective on Hong Kong's strategy, the future you see for stablecoins, or just how you're navigating this fast-changing landscape. Drop us a comment, share your thoughts. We're always interested in what stands out to you from these deep dives.